is delighted to offer these weekly sings free of charge, though we are grateful for any donations you can give to help cover the costs. Now, as I mentioned last week, we are continuing to make adjustments to the format as we receive feedback, so I have a few quick technical notes for this week. This week, the chat function will remain open and active. However, if you have a specific question for tech or for our conductor, please utilize the Q&A feature at the bottom of the webinar screen. Additionally, this week, our conductor will scroll through the scores for both pieces on the screen, but we still recommend that you open the PDF of the public domain scores. The links for those are available on our website. That's westvillagechorale.org, and it's in the Summer Sings page. All right, now on to tonight's program. We are thrilled to have Dr. Colin Britt lead the Fauré Requiem and Cantique de Jean Racine. Colin Britt is our very own artistic director of the West Village Chorale. Maestro, it's good to see you. Thanks for being here today, and please take it away.
All right, thank you, Marguerite. Hi, everybody. So yes, as Marguerite said, please utilize the Q&A feature if you have questions about the music or just technical issues. Those of you who are used to using Zoom for rehearsals or meetings, you should know that we're doing this as a webinar rather than as a typical Zoom meeting. That allows us a little bit greater control over the format of the evening. And the other thing Marguerite mentioned was that if you haven't yet downloaded the score, you may find it helpful to visit this page, which I'm going to put in the chat, and you can download the music there for both pieces. As she said, I'll also be sharing my screen throughout the process. Liam, I don't know if I'm the only one who sees this, but I still see Marguerite's face frozen, and it's a very bemused face, but I just wasn't sure if I was the only one seeing it. So, but either way, as long as everybody can see me and hear me, then we're in good shape. So before we start, I'll start with a warm up and we'll sing through the pieces. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about just the pieces that we're going to be singing. And I'll start by saying that the Fauré Requiem is, for me, one of those pieces that just I never get tired of. It's a piece that I encountered fairly early in my career. I was a junior in college the first time I sang it, and I immediately fell in love with it. And it's just a piece that I never get tired of singing. And I think that that's in part because Fauré is such a gifted melodist, and he writes so well for the voice. But the piece itself is also, for a composer who was openly agnostic, which Fauré was, he still manages to capture this spiritual quality of the text. And it, along with a few other settings, notably the Brahms Requiem, is one of those pieces that just always speaks to me. I'm going to talk a little bit about Fauré first, and then we'll do a warm-up and we'll sing through the Cantique. So if you will bear with me, I'm going to share my screen and hold on. Then I will talk through this presentation. Liam, can you give me access to share the screen? It would help tremendously. While we're waiting for that, actually, I don't need to do that. Marge mentioned that we were privileged, I assume the West Village Chorale was able to sing the Fauré Requiem on the first anniversary of 9/11. That's the other thing. It's a piece that provides a lot of comfort. Compared to some other settings of the Requiem, I think it's a very gentle treatment of this subject. Fauré notably omits the Dies Irae and the Tuba Miron, which are some of the more turbulent parts of the Requiem that you might experience in, say, the Mozart or the Verdi, and instead focuses on, again, a very comforting tone. We are in business, so here we go. So welcome to the Fauré Requiem and the Cantique de Jean Racine. So here's Fauré. Fauré lived a fairly long life. He lived to be about 79 years old from 1845 to 1924. And he did travel quite a bit, but he spent most of his career working in Paris or just outside of Paris. he was born into a not particularly musical family, although they were a cultured family. At age 9, he was sent to the École de Meyer Music College in Paris, where he studied with Saint-Saëns, who also became a lifelong friend of his. Saint-Saëns also had a very long life, and they were friends throughout. After finishing his studies, he was appointed the organist at the Church of the Saint-Sauveur in Brittany. Then, following the Prussia-French War, he returned to Paris in 1871, where he was appointed the choir master at Saint-Sulpice under Charles-Marie Widor. If you're familiar with organ music, you're getting kind of a who's who of French organ composers and famous organists. In 1874, he moved to the Church of the Madeleine, where he became the deputy organist for Saint-Saëns. The Church of the Madeleine is where he would then spend most of his career as a church musician. And as I said, he was agnostic, but he did spend about 40 years as an organist. Despite playing the organ professionally for 40 years, he notably wrote no solo organ works. And Saint-Saëns said of him that he was a first-class organist when he wanted to be. So I think he, like a lot of composers, were motivated by both the practical and the more intrinsic longing. This is the Church of the Madeleine in Paris. And this is a picture I actually took of the interior in 2014, about 6 years ago. It kind of reminds me of a bank, but it's a beautiful architecture. These sort of low-hanging chandeliers and the marble columns sort of have a quality of a bank to me. But again, it's a beautiful church with a great organ. Some more life and career highlights. Following Saint-Saëns' departure and then later Dubois' departure from the Madeleine, Fauré assumed the position of the chief organist there in 1896. That move was actually somewhat problematic for the music scene because this Massenet, again, another famous composer, was expecting that position. Massenet worked at the Conservatoire with Dubois. And so, with Dubois. And so when he was not awarded that position, he resigned from the conservatory in anger. And so I think the conservatory kind of called his bluff and appointed Fauré to that position. Where he taught there for many decades. His pupils include, again, a who's who of some French composers, including Ravel, Ionescu, Casella, and Nadia Boulanger, who then went on to teach some of the most significant composers of the 20th century. Fauré struggled, as many composers did, to find time to compose, and he would often leave Paris during the summers to concentrate on writing. He was prolific, but he was also very self-critical, and he destroyed a lot of his works. Later in life, he developed significant problems with his hearing. He went partially deaf, and the low and high extremes of his hearing would become distorted, and that limited, in some ways, his ability to continue performing. The early 20th century, so the last 25 years or so of his life, saw a significant rise in his popularity, particularly in Britain, Germany, Spain, and Russia. He's largely was very popular in England throughout his career, in fact. In 1920, he retired, and that year he also received the Grand Croix de Légion d'honneur, which is quite a big deal for him, obviously, well, just for the Paris cultural scene in general. And he died in 1924 from pneumonia, but he lived 79 years. So his compositions, his works include over 100 songs, works for piano and for chamber ensembles, 2 operas, a handful of orchestral works, and the Requiem and several shorter choral works. I don't know why that just happened. Chief among those accomplishments are his art songs, which Ravel later wrote that his writing saved French music from the dominance of the German leader. He was not the only significant French art song composer, but certainly one of the first, and paved the way for other composers such as Debussy, who wrote tremendous contributions to that genre. The Cantique de Jean Racine, he wrote in 1864 and 1865 while he was a student. He was only 19 years old, and he wrote it as for a competition, which he won. And so we're going to start with this, but before we do that, I'm going to take a break from this, and we're going to do a warm-up. I'm just making sure I'm not missing anything. I see some chat. Okay, yes. Okay, thank you. So we're going to start by standing and doing a little bit of stretching. I know that each conductor has done their warm-up slightly differently, but I'm going to start by just getting us to move around a little bit. So if you will indulge me, I'm going to assume that you are doing the same thing that I am, and if not, well, you sip on your wine and enjoy the Parisian night. So start by just rolling your shoulders and go the other way. And tilt your head to one side gently. And the other side. And go down and back. Roll your shoulders again. Interlace your fingers in front of your face. And maybe just yawn lightly. And then go behind your back. And shake it out. And maybe just kind of wiggle your legs back and forth a little bit. Try not to lock your knees. I find that just even the act of getting up from my chair and my computer a couple times a day is really important when I have long days on Zoom. Just take a breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And in and out and in and out. One more breath in and out. And you're just going to do a nice yawn vowel. Yaw. Breathe. Yaw. Yaw. Keep going. Yaw. Yaw. Last one. Now, either on a lip bubble or a tongue, or if you can't do either of those things, go using your teeth and your lower lip. You're gonna go. So just slide up and down between the lower note and the fifth higher. And one more. Last one you're going to do is and I want you to bend your knees on the top note. So it's going to go go. Couple more. Last one. And just do another. The nice thing about this for hopefully all of you is that you can do that at any point during the evening and you won't bother any singers next to you unless you happen to be living with them. But yeah, it's nice to have a little bit of privacy, I suppose, with that. All right, so back to the Cantique. So let me just pull this up again. All right, so the Cantique de Jean Racine is a setting of Jean Racine's paraphrase of the Latin hymn Consors Paterni Luminis. He wrote it for a composition composition competition, which he won. This is the translation, or a translation. I'll give you a minute to just skim through that. Interestingly, there is a published translation of this, and my first encounter of this piece when I was in high school was an English translation. Now, of course, the French is original and far more beautiful, but the English translation is quite pleasant as well. So I'm going to pull open my score of the piece now and point out a couple things to you. And again, the chat was, or rather, I put the link in the chat. I'll put it there one more time. Right there. But you can find the score if you don't want to follow along with me. However, you should have no problem seeing it here as well. So this, again, he wrote this when he was 19. Fauré was nothing if not a melodist. And I find that throughout all of his pieces, there's just such a strong presence of melody. And you'll hear it when we listen through it. This figure here in the organ sets up the melody that we're going to be singing in a few minutes. But even the accompaniment has a tremendous melodic character to it. And some minor chromaticisms, but very, very pleasant overall. And I find that just pervades his music. The melody appears here. This score is on 2 staves. I think many of us are familiar with the Durand edition, which has 4 staves. But this would be normally the basses followed by the tenors entering on the second phrase. The counterpart is not particularly complicated. We do have some nice, in the B section, some nice call and response sections, particularly the down here, ki la, ki la, ki la. So be listening for that interchange of voices, because it's noticeable when it does come out. French is not my first non-English language, but I will attempt to give you just a quick guideline of the pronunciation, and then we will sing through it. If you'd like to speak in response, that's fine. Of course, even French speakers can't agree on when to elide and when not to elide their consonants. So you do what you are comfortable with or familiar with if you don't like what I say. Verbe égal au trésor, notre unique espérance, jour éternel. The tenors and basses sing de la terre et des cieux, elision there. And then the altos come in, de la paisible nuit. Nous rompons le silence. Divin Sauveur, jette sur nous les yeux. Then we repeat that. Divin Sauveur, jette sur nous les yeux. We'll go on to the next section, and then we'll go back and sing through the whole thing after we've done that. Répands sur nous le feu de ta grâce puissante, que tout l'enfer fuit au son de ta voix, dissipe le sommeil d'une âme languissante. This is that section I was talking about. Qui l'a conduit à l'oubli. There's that elision again. De tes lois. Qui l'a conduit à l'oubli de tes lois. Au Christ soit favorable. That's an elision. So favorable elides to a. So favorable à ce peuple fidèle pour te bénir. Maintenant rassemblés. And then altos come in. Reçois les chants qu'il offre. You all say that. Reçois les chants qu'il offre à ta gloire immortelle. So the sopranos get to elide gloire immortelle, and then the tenors come in on immortelle without the previous word. De tes dons qu'il retourne comblé. Et de tes dons qui retourne comblé. And then it repeats itself. All right. If you don't want to deal with the French, then sing do 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 or la la la. You get to choose. All right. I'm just going to make sure that the audio is working. So if after a minute or two you haven't heard the music, please do let me know. Okay. Here we go. This is, by the way, Stephen Cleoberry in the Choir of King's College singing this piece. little bit of reactionary conducting there at the end. I can't cut off an organ who can't see me, but good. Such a lovely piece. One of the things that I'm just going to point out that struck me this time and always is how the second time through the A section, which is the we have that beautiful moment where you're expecting it to go right where we are. You're expecting it to go up to. Which is what it does the first time, but rather he delays that by inserting a predominant. And you have this beautiful sequence of this until we finally get to the climax on the next page. But it's just a wonderful, marvelous instance of that delayed harmonic gratification. So I'm going to pivot now to the Requiem. Again, he wrote this when he was 19. He didn't start working on the Requiem until about 20 years after this, or even a little more. I'm making sure I haven't missed any Q&As. Good, okay. So let me go back to my little PowerPoint. So by all accounts, Fauré began working on the piece in his own words, for the pleasure of it. It wasn't in direct response, or at least not publicly direct response to anything. Of course, his father did pass away 2 years earlier, and his mother's 2 years later, so it may have influenced it, but it was not in direct response. And as I mentioned, also he was agnostic despite working for the church throughout his career. So the Requiem is not necessarily an expression of personal faith, although it may be an expression of his humanism. At least 3 official versions exist. The first version is the chamber orchestra version, which was completed in 1888. And that version includes the Introit and the Kyrie, the Sanctus, the Pie Jesu, the Agnus Dei, and the In Paradisum. He never wrote a complete Requiem, as many composers did not, but it's notable that he omits the Dies Irae. And then in that version, I'll talk about the instrumentation a little later, but that version tends to be sort of what we define as the introduction of his instrumental forces for this piece. In 1893, he released an expanded version that included the offertory and the Libera-me. The Libera-me he'd actually written over a decade earlier, independently, or at least part of it. But so the 1893 version is when we first see that piece added. It's inserted in the Requiem just as Verdi inserted it into his Requiem. And the offertory has a funny story behind it too, because it exists in 2 forms. I'll get to that later. And then finally in 1900, probably from pressure from his publisher, he published a version for full orchestra, which many consider to be the I don't want to say inferior version, but the large orchestration doesn't add so much as it just augments. So the original orchestration calls for kind of a hodgepodge of solo instruments and then strings and organ, but notably he leaves out the violins completely except for a violin solo in the Sanctus. One may draw connections with that and the first movement of the Brahms Requiem, which also notably omits the violins. Brahms was certainly a well-known composer at this time, but we don't know that that was necessarily a direct influence on Fauré. However, the other instruments tend to vary in prominence and importance, and often largely double the organ part or add color to it. There are, again, obviously some exceptions, but certainly the violin solo stands out as being an anomaly in an otherwise kind of darker, more sonorous texture. And John Rutter, in his edition, which I suspect is the version that many of you have, he talks about how it could have been that just as in Bach's church, there were singers who might be called upon to play an instrument for one Sunday or one piece. The orchestral instruments, as I said, often double the organ part, adding richness of texture and color, but never overshadowing the organ part. And then the 1900 orchestration is largely superfluous. The violins tend to just double the violas a lot. There are other treble instruments like clarinets and flutes that are added, but they don't necessarily enhance the piece as a whole. the form of the Requiem is at least the version that we're doing today is the introit and the Kyrie, which are presented as one movement. The Kyrie uses the same text, the same melody as the Requiem, the introit. The offertory, I mentioned this earlier, but he wrote the Ostias first, the baritone solo, and then he added the rest of the piece, and so those were added to the piece in 1893. The Sanctus, the Pie Jesu, which is a soprano solo, the Agnus Dei, and the Libidame, which was also added in 1893. And as I said, it drew from pre-existing material. And then finally concluding with the In Paradisum. So a number of sections of the Requiem text are omitted, most notably the entire sequence, the Dies Irae is omitted. And also there's no Lux Aeterna. Oh, excuse me, that's in the Agnus Dei. It's not a separate movement. All right. So let's get into this. I can close this window now. Have I missed anything? We have some Q&As. I have not actually. It is, oh, it's here. So Marge asked me if I've ever written a Requiem. Some of you know that I'm a composer, and I have not. I think I'm saving it for when it needs to be written. I've written excerpts from the Requiem text, including a Lux Aeterna, but not a full Requiem setting. I also haven't written a Mass, but that's neither here nor there. All right, I can say done now. Cool. Thank you for asking, though. All right, so there are 3 recordings that I'm going to be playing or swapping between. One is the same, actually off of the same album that we listened to for the Cantique, which is the King's College version with Stephen Cleoberry. One is, which is going to be the first recording you hear, is by the 16, conducted by Harry Christophers, and joined by the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields. And then a couple movements I'm going to play are actually from a performance that I was lucky enough to conduct in New Haven back in 2011 for a benefit concert. And I'll introduce those when I get to them. But the first movement you're going to hear will be the recording by the 16. Excuse me. Here is the score. And again, if you prefer to follow along with a different edition, that's your prerogative. The measure numbers are the same as far as I know, although I don't believe the letter names are. But this edition is pretty consistent with the Rudder Hinshaw edition. So first of all, you'll notice that throughout the piece, and again, I would, at the beginning of one of these summer sings, I would ask you to raise your hands and tell me how many of you have sung this piece and how many of you have not. I would bet money that the vast majority of you have sung this piece at least once in your lives. But again, I'll talk through a couple of notable features. First of all, there, as far as I know, very few, if any, divises in the sopranos and altos, but significantly more divises for the tenors and basses, probably owing in part to Fauré's work at a church with men and boys. But so you'll notice that there are many more divises in the lower voices than in the trebles. This moves mostly in chordal function, so I'm not going to rehearse it specifically, but I am going to point out a couple of unusual harmonic shifts that take place. Starting at, on this edition, page 5, but starting in measure 50, we have this wonderful chromatic motion where we have the exaudi oratione meam, and he moves very smartly with enharmonic modulations that they sound intuitive, but they do not look intuitive on the page. So I'm going to draw your attention to 2 of them. First, sopranos and altos, starting at the exaudi. Here's the alto part, and here's the soprano part. So 2, 3, and. Now chromatic half step up. So we briefly modulate up from F major to F sharp minor. So sopranos and altos, you're a half step higher. That's what I was trying to say, but I wasn't articulating it well, from your first entrance here. And then altos, you have an unharmonic relationship from "A te omnis caro veniet." The E sharp becomes the F. Tenors and basses, let's do the same thing for you at Exaudi. 3, 4. And 1. And then we gradually make our way back to, D minor, which is where we started. So that's really the most notable thing to watch out for in this movement. There's a little bit of chromaticisms here on the Christe. It's also a very short Kyrie. We only get about 8 measures before we go right into the Christe and then back. But sopranos and altos, just watch out for the chromaticisms on eleison, Christe, Christe. That pivot that he does is really striking, from the D7 minor 9 chord to the dominant 7 of D minor. So it feels very unresolved, and it kind of makes you work for it until you finally get to the ending. The other thing I just love so much is the lowered eleison after the Kyrie here, which is an E natural. All I see is the left side of the music flashing by. You may need to adjust your screen, and you can, I think, minimize the zoom components. If you're having a hard time seeing it, you may need to adjust the size of each window. You should be able to do that without too much difficulty. I'll make this a little bigger just in case that helps. I'm looking to see if there's anybody else with issues. Yeah, I'm going to try to only refer to measure numbers versus page numbers, because I know that people are using different editions. And like I said, the measure numbers should be the same. But I referred to page 5 just kind of quickly there. All right. Any other? Okay. I think we're good to go. So we're going to start with the first movement. Again, this is the St. Martin in the Fields and 16 recording. All right. I know that there are some minor discrepancies that you're going to come across throughout this piece, this score rather, and try not to stress about them. This is a very nicely done free edition on from CPDL, the Choral Public Domain Library. So as with anything you get on the internet, you know have to know that there's some room for error. So if you are using your score at home, please rely more on that. All right. So as I said, the offertory was added after the piece's composition. It wasn't until about 5 years later that this version was added, and it begins with this really kind of dark and not brooding, but melancholy introduction in the strings. It's also the most counterpoint we really get in this piece. The first entrance is the altos and the tenors, and I'm going to sing through that entrance once with the altos first. So from O Domine, 3 and Ah. O Domine, Jesu Christe, ex gloriae, libera animas defunctorum. And the tenors have the answer to that. And one. O Domine Jesu Christe, rex gloriae, libera animas defunctorum. So we have that little bit of interchange. There's some really gorgeous dissonances that are resulting from that, particularly the one on the animas here. We have and we don't get many instances of that kind of counterpoint in this piece, but when we do, I think we have to enjoy them. And then we have this lovely duet in thirds for the et de penis inferni et de profundo lacu. And then he modulates that same figure up 2 more times. So each time we get a little more intense. The third time the basses join and they get something similar. So we're going to get to sing that in a minute, but I'm going to jump ahead to the end of the movement now. We have this ostias, which you all get to sing because you're all solos now, right? Which again predates the rest of the movement. It comes from about 1889. And also just a little orchestration note, the opening of the piece has this really, really gorgeous, so measure 5 of this movement rather. And that's going to become the accompaniment for the ostias. So listen for that to come back again, but in major. The other thing to listen for is right here, measure 53. In the organ part, we have a recurrence of the tibi omnes. It's the beginning of the te deceti nusensi. Sorry, I couldn't remember the text. But interestingly, he superimposes it over the 3/4 pattern, even though the Requiem is in a duple meter. So it's really quite clever how he fits that together. And then after the baritone solo is finished, we get the full counterpoint with all 4 voices. Sopranos, thank you for your patience in advance. So the basses get to come in here. So that you have the first full statement this time. Tenors, you come in floating on this little sort of echo of the idea. Altos, you come in a third higher than the tenors. So it's similar to what you've already done, but now it's a third higher. And then sopranos, you have something that kind of looks major. O Domine Jesu Christe. there's not too many chromatic things to watch out for, but altos, notice that you get this nice little half step relationship here. This is measure 82, by the way, if you're following along. Defunctorum de penis inferni. That chromatic section leads to this glorious climax of the movement on Inferni. Basses, you've got a tritone leap up, measure 81 again. Libera defunctorum de penis, etc. Sopranos, you have less chromaticisms, and tenors, you just have to watch out for your F natural. Defunctorum de penis inferni. And then we get this little hushed recurrence of the necadant. And then the amen is just so beautiful. It's mostly scalar. It's very few leaps or skips. It's just absolutely radiant. I'm just glancing in the chat to see if there's anything that people were. Oh, good. Just making sure you're all good. All right. So let's sing through this movement now. I believe this is also the recording of the 16. love those long organ holdovers at the end, don't they? I realize that the score that we're looking at doesn't have a lot of the instrumental cues, and so you're missing some of those gorgeous counter melodies that appear in the violas and the cellos. So I just invite you to listen to them, even if you can't see them on the page. Speaking of missing cello parts and viola parts, we're going to jump onto the Sanctus now. And you'll notice, if you're familiar with this piece, this is not really what you hear when you hear a performance of this. You hear the harp, you hear the undulating and the violas. And then the violin solo appears for the first time in this movement. So Sanctus, Sanctus. Which, if you're paying attention, that melody should sound familiar. Again, from the Te Decet Hymnus, from the introit. So this movement is almost entirely in unisons, except for the very end in triad. So I'm not going to rehearse it, just going to point out a couple things. Altos, obviously, you can sing any part you like. You don't really get to do anything until the very end, and I'm sorry. I guess Fauré felt the need to make it up to the sopranos for their limited involvement in the offertory. But glom onto the soprano part of the tenor part and have fun. And then just know that I think that this climax here from the Hosanna in excelsis leading into this big moment here is just one of the most glorious moments of any Requiem setting. And we have a lot of great Sanctus settings to choose from in Requiems, right? But this one I think is just particularly stunning. And then, of course, altos, he finally brings you in for 2 notes at the end. I also love that he leaves the voices in this odd inversion for the basses, which, of course, the organ and the strings make up for with the pedal E flat. But it's a second inversion chord, which is not a stable chord. But again, in the grand scheme of things, it's less obvious. All right, this recording is one of the movements from the performance that I conducted in New Haven. So you're going to be hearing some of my my friends and colleagues from my time living in New Haven playing on this. All right, here we go. no less beautiful is the Pie Jesu, although certainly of a different character. And I'm not going to rehearse this one either, so everybody gets to sing if they like. Tenors and basses, if you've always wanted to sing the soprano Pie Jesu from the Fauré Requiem, now's your chance. But I'm just going to point out the beautiful scoring of this movement. It's mostly accompanied by organ under the soloist, and the strings and harp come in. And it's cued here, but this cued, not cute. They come in at measure 8, and it's just very sort of glassy, glimmering texture of. It's just super delicate, and I just love how he scores that. The strings do get to come in towards the end with the arrival point here at measure 29 into 30. This is also from that performance in New Haven. This is my friend Scheherazade Pentaki, who's actually a very, very accomplished, largely early music soprano, but she was doing what's called the Yale Voxtet at the time. And so she was doing her master's degree in voice at the Institute of Sacred Music and the School of Music. And so she's singing this solo. But you get to sing with her. Yeah, so just another absolutely gorgeous setting of this text. It's hard to pick a favorite moment or movement in this piece because every moment you're with is sort of the moment like you love the most. But I would say that the most sort of nostalgic or just immediately fulfilling movement for me is often the Agnus Dei because of this gorgeous line in the violas. That figure is just, and the way that he uses it as an accompanying figure is just really, really extraordinary. I also often complain as a composer because Fauré was just so overflowing with melodies that he throws not one but two beautiful melodies at you at the same time in this instance, because the tenors sing something completely different. Agnus Dei qui tollis pecca. They're obviously related material, but it's still it's an independent melody line. I'm going to skim through this to get to where the choral parts get a little more juicy. So the tenors have that beautiful line, which again, sing with them if you like, because you can and no one will know. This section is tricky primarily, I think, because of the sudden harmonic shifts. You're expecting something and then he throws C minor at you instead of C major. So we have... he does give you a preview in the horns and the orchestra here. Bum on you. So he gives you your note, which is quite polite of him. And then this is mostly just chromatic, like half step motion. And then that repeats. This is a preview of what's to come. We get another return of the opening figure. And then this section is just truly extraordinary writing. He moves to the circle of fifths, or loosely to the circle of fifths in a really unexpected way. And it kind of foreshadows a lot of music that you might hear in the 20th century. The Lux Aeterna, the light eternal, light perpetual. It's just such a marvelous harmonic progression. And he sets it up quite logically for the voices. So basses, for example, the Lux Aeterna. If you're not looking at it, it doesn't sound that unusual. And he sets it up through common tone modulations or stepwise motion. Same thing, tenors and sopranos and altos you have, or tenors and altos you have. That's just a half step motion. And then the figure comes back. Sopranos, you have this undulating melody. But it's sequential, meaning that it follows a sequence that is expected, right? And then again, you're missing some of the most amazing orchestration moments in this piece. Although the horns are present, dum bum 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 bum, but we have this just tremendous pull towards the dominant. You have this and you feel that sense of gravity. The tenor part here is one of my favorites because this isn't really rehearsing. This is just telling you what I like, I guess. But you have this wonderful minor seventh chord, and then that B flat in the sopranos against the A natural and the baritones is really, really extraordinary. And then we have finally, as is not unusual in a Lux Aeterna, we have a return to the Requiem, the introit. And he uses the same material, again, not surprisingly, with a motion to the major key rather than the minor key. And then finally, that opening figure comes back again, but this time in the cellos and the violas. So the cellos are way up here on their A strings, and it's just unbelievably expressive writing. So that was kind of the highlights reel. Now let's actually sing through the whole thing. I believe we're going back to... This is the This is the Stephen Cleoberry King's College version. Tenors and wannabe tenors. Just such exquisite, such perfect writing. So we only have 2 more movements to go, so we're nearing the end. I want to take just a minute to and Marguerite introduced me, but I just want to make sure you know a little bit about who we are, the West Village Chorale, and also our summer sings. We host these every Monday night. Normally, during the summer, we have them in person because there's nothing like singing with other humans, and that's why we do what we do and why we love choral music. But obviously during the pandemic, this is forcing us to make some difficult choices and to adapt. And that's what we're doing right now. The West Village Chorale typically has 3 concerts a year, one in December, one in March, and one in May or early June. And our plan for this season, this coming season, while not yet officially released, is to sort of follow the trend of what other arts organizations in the city are doing. We're planning on having a virtual performance in December, which will be made up of a lot of small ensemble numbers and a couple of virtual choir pieces. And then as it becomes safe again to sing together in person, which hopefully science and smart politicians will enable us, but hopefully in the spring we'll be able to start rehearsing together in person again and offer a live streamed concert in March. And then finally in May, we're hoping that by that point, assuming it's again that a vaccine has been made available, we'll be having our main spring concert. This coming season is also our 50th anniversary season, but we're sort of celebrating it kind of loosely across 2021 because it seems a little odd to have a gala in the middle of quarantine. But all of this is to say that we are very much committed to continuing our programming and providing this service to our choral, both our choral audiences and our choral colleagues in the city. So if you are able to make even a small donation, it will greatly help us to continue this mission and to continue providing this service every summer, as well as all of our other programming that we provide during the season. If I don't know if it's already been done. Oh, there it is. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. The donate link is in the chat if you'd like to swing over there. Margaret will be back a little later to talk to us once more, but I am going to move forward with the remainder of this piece because it is simply glorious. So the next movement, as I mentioned, is the Libera-me, and this was added officially to the piece in 1893, and it features the baritone solo again. The choral parts don't come in for the first time until measure 37. And this is sort of a departure from a lot of the other material in the piece. We haven't encountered this music at all, or this kind of writing. And we're dealing with kind of the end of time stuff here. The Fauré doesn't set the Dies Irae, but the Libera-me has some of the more frightening passages of the Requiem, and it does include the text, tearful that day, full of calamity and misery. So we normally and say the Verdi Requiem, he quotes himself. Here this is the first time we've come across this text, and you get quite a bit of that sort of turbulent emotional quality to it. And then the ending, which I find so striking, is everybody gets to sing this unison line, the baritone solo line, and there's something so haunting about hearing a unison choir sing this melody, especially when again we haven't had that texture yet. So really just please enjoy and relish the sense, the drama that comes out of the text at this point. Also his use of these rising figures, quando cieli movendi sunt, quando cieli movendi sunt a terra. That falling seventh is so expressive. I don't think you need me to talk about it anymore. And we're kind of past the point in the evening when rehearsing it feels fun. So let's just sing it. This is the other movement I'm going to play from the performance I did in New Haven. And Tyler Simpson is the baritone solo. Tyler was another friend of mine from Yale's. He's actually now a member of the Met Chorus. which of course, like every arts organization, professional arts organization in the country, is currently furloughed. But I look forward to when he's able to return to the job that he loves so much and get to do what he does. But you'll hear just how exquisite of a voice he has. You can, of course, sing along with it. close out with the In Paradisum, which just I think sort of puts a bow on the package that is the Fauré Requiem. It's just such a beautiful and peaceful view of the departure of the soul. The violin solo does return in this, so if you've been worried about their feelings, they come back. Otherwise, I think the piece is pretty straightforward. It's very chant-like in the soprano part, and everybody else kind of comes in and provides this warm chordal texture. So here we go, and this will be the 16 performance one more time. And we can all give each other a round of applause virtually on Zoom. I know we can't see each other, but we are clapping for one another, and hopefully clapping for yourselves for taking the time to give music back to yourself on Monday night. I think that the fact that there are 124 people still on, which is amazing, and that so many of you already know this piece really, really well, but that you would invest an evening to come together virtually and experience this piece together speaks to the power of music like this and to the just how beloved this piece is. I feel very lucky to get to lead you through it. I wanted to mention, I'm sorry I didn't mention it earlier, but before I hand it back over to Marguerite, some of you often ask at these summer sings how auditions work for each of these groups. And right now, I'd just say that if you're interested in joining the West Village Chorale, to contact us, you can email westvillagechorale@gmail.com and get more information about that. I have done Zoom auditions in the past, so it is possible. And again, our plan is to do a virtual fall season, and then hopefully to slowly start back up again as it becomes safe in the spring. I also want to mention that we, along with many of our peer organizations, are very much committed to speaking out for the marginalized voices in our country, and also to speak out against injustice. And we're looking at a season that finds different ways to do that throughout. So that is one of our ongoing missions, and one that I'm proud to be able to help continue. So I think you've heard enough of me. I'll see Marguerite's back on. I'm going to put a link in the chat for a separate Zoom meeting account if anybody wants to hop on and say hi face to face with me, or anybody else before the evening is done, because I know we don't get to mingle and schmooze like we usually do. So while Marguerite's talking, I'll paste that in the link. But otherwise, thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you this evening and to work through this piece with you. And I hope you all stay safe and well and happy. Thank you.
Yeah, well, Colin, this has been great. Thank you so much for leading us in an evening of Fauré. I personally loved that piece, and it was great to sing along. So thank you. And thank you everyone for turning into our third digital summer sing. As we said last week, this is an evolving format, and we still want to hear your feedback. So please fill out the survey that pops up once the webinar ends, and we welcome all of your comments. Before we go, I would love to tell you about our next two summer sings. Next Monday, we will have Dusty Francis, the artistic director of New York City Master Chorale, leading us in the Mozart Requiem, which is, of course, a choral favorite. And the following week, August 3rd, is a special summer sing, something we haven't done before. It's a summer sing premiere. We will be singing selections from living composer Mary D. Watkins' piece, Dark River. This piece is a new opera oratorio based on the life of the civil rights activist Fannie Lou Hamer, and we will have a soprano soloist joining us, and rumor has it the composer Mary Watkins might even make a special appearance. Since we will be singing the work of a living composer, we will have portions of the score available for purchase at a modest cost in advance. The conductor will also show the score on the screen that evening as well. We'll post the links up in the website and send it out in our email, so just be on the lookout for that. It's going to be a really special and relevant sing, and we hope you'll be able to join us. So that's it for me. We hope you enjoyed your evening and consider making a donation to the West Village Chorale. Thanks again, Colin, for a wonderful sing, and good night, everyone. Thank you.